everyone. So I hope you've had a good lunch. A little bit about me, which I think's mainly been covered, but I was lucky enough to be listed by IBM Watson in the top 20 global AI influencers in February, which was A, a big surprise, and B, very, very honored to be on that list. I was actually one below Elon Musk, so everyone was like, wow, how could you be one below Elon Musk? But anyway, my background is in AI and machine learning and neural networks, so I did a PhD in it about 20 years ago when it wasn't so cool and trendy, but turns out I was actually doing deep learning before I actually knew what deep learning was, but that's another story. So about 2.5 years ago, there seemed to be a lot of negativity about AI. It was going to kill the human race and cause disasters. I felt that wasn't quite true, and I wanted to do something a bit more positive to support the community. So I set up Informed AI, which is really trying to support the community, share knowledge, bring people together. So I run the annual awards for AI, which is now in its 3rd year. I also run Neurons, which is a sort of meetup groups in different cities. I'm actually launching the one in Melbourne this week as well, so looking forward to that. I'm on the committee for the British Computer Society group for AI as well. I also help advise the all-party group, the government group that are currently collecting evidence on AI in terms of trying to advise the government things that they need to be aware of going forward. But my main job, I suppose, is I work for Credit Suisse, and I set up and run the firm-wide working group for machine learning. Did that about 2.5 years ago. I also run an innovation group as part of my work there. And I also advise various groups within the firm on RPA and automation as well. So that's a little bit about me. So from my perspective, it's a really interesting time to work in AI and machine learning. And for me, I did my PhD in it 20 years ago, and I've been waiting patiently for this time because it's a great time to be working in it. There's so much energy and opportunity, but it is a little bit like the Wild West. There's so much out there to be discovered, and I think it's a huge opportunity, but part of the challenge is the landscape's constantly changing. So almost every week there's new research on new techniques, new algorithms. There's new tools and frameworks coming out all the time. And it's actually a real challenge to keep on top of all of that and understand how you can turn that into something useful for your business users. And it's a challenge, but an exciting one as well. But it's just something to be mindful of, I think. I want to relate AI and machine learning to what happened with electricity. So when you look back through history, it took about 100 years, maybe even more, because I think the first experiment was done in the 1600s to sort of discover electricity, or at least understand how we could use it. So 100 years of actually all the inventions around electricity, and then another 100 years to essentially apply that knowledge and utilize it in the ways that we do now. So if you reflect that to AI, so AI really started in the 1950s. However, deep learning's only sort of kicked in the last sort of 4 or 5 years. But the innovation is really important in this space, and there are thousands of people doing research in all of the big technology companies. So places like Google have got more researchers than some universities have, and it's just unbelievable the amount of research that the big tech firms are putting into this. And innovation is really sort of becoming exponential as well. So what we'll see happen in the next sort of 10, 15 years is just going to be amazing compared to what we've seen in the past 20, 30 years. And these are just a sort of few quotes around that. So it's definitely, you know, an amazing period of time. And I think people talk about the sort of general AI and the singularity, and people are being very vague as to when that's going to happen because of this fact that it's becoming so exponential in our achievements that it's quite difficult to pinpoint exactly when that's going to happen. So a little bit about Credit Suisse. So Credit Suisse has a number of applications of machine learning in live production systems now, and they range from things like chatbots, RPA, natural language processing, natural language generation, but also predictive and sort of other sort of more traditional machine learning applications. So over the last few years, we've been building those applications out. We've also got a large number of proof of concepts, proof of values, pilot projects that are running at the moment. As I mentioned, I run a firm-wide working group for machine learning as well, which cuts across all the departments across the firm and engages with both business and IT users as well. It's been quite a dynamic time at Credit Suisse, and what I'm hoping to share with you now is 9 key things that we've found useful in the adoption of machine learning and how you can hopefully sort of fast track that. So the first key point is leveraging the hidden talent. Now, there's been a lot of talk about everybody needs data scientists and there's the global shortage of data scientists. What I've found actually, when you start talking to people in your organization, there'll be hidden talents in the organization. There'll be people that maybe have got an MSc in machine learning, but sort of just haven't had the opportunity to use their knowledge. There may be others that are really keen to work in that space, and they've sort of been doing all these online courses and training. Another key area is the young talent, so the summer interns and graduates are all, in my experience, super keen to start working in this space, and a lot of the universities are sort of giving them courses on this kind of thing already. So in addition to just sort of finding that hidden talent, doing things like running hackathons, knowledge sharing, using your available internal sort of platforms that you have and wikis and all that kind of thing, that you can just sort of start putting stuff out there and getting people to contribute, start the conversations. It's a really powerful way to sort of get things moving. Within Credit Suisse, we set up an innovation group just within one department, and we've got over 130 volunteers that are sort of, in addition to their day job, are happy to help sort of run proof of concepts on various different technologies. And we actually, the innovation group, we focus on 6 different technologies, machine learning being one of them, but there's big data, cloud, blockchain, a few others as well. And we found this a really good way, and it works in 2 ways. It allows us to do additional proof of concepts that maybe we wouldn't be able to do otherwise, but it also gives the employees a chance to play with the technology and learn themselves as well. So it's 2 parts to this in terms of what we get out of it. The second thing that we've found useful is, so this is the innovation funnel, and really the idea is to fail fast. So try lots of different things, but don't be afraid to fail. And I think this, for a large corporate, this is a really strange thing for them to do, because they just expect everything to work. But actually having that innovation mindset and saying, well, we'll try something, if it doesn't work, that's fine. We've learned something. We just move on and don't try and sort of flog a dead horse. Just say, right, that's not worked. Maybe try and figure out why, but then try something else. And we found this sort of works quite nicely, but it essentially allows us to keep that focus. And what we try and do, in addition to proof of concepts, we do smaller scale proof of value, so smaller in terms of the time that we commit to it, but also potentially smaller in terms of the size of the data that we might use to analyze. So the next thing, and actually this for me has been the most powerful thing that you can do, is to set up a working group. And when I did this, it was me and a couple of guys that I just started talking to about we should be doing more machine learning at Credit Suisse. And we started those meetings, and then through basic word of mouth, more people came in. We found people in different parts of the organization that maybe were already running little proof of concepts. We found people in the business that were actually doing their own sort of machine learning projects as well. And this working group actually there's 3 distinct user groups in there. So there's business users that are interested in solving a problem and they think machine learning is appropriate. There's IT people who have some expertise with the techniques. And then there's other IT folks that maybe are just interested or want to get involved, want to help, and want to learn about the technology and the algorithms and the techniques, but don't have that sort of foundation knowledge. And this working group has really, really enabled us to share knowledge across the organization, essentially understand all the different proof of concepts that are running across the firm, understand what technologies different groups are looking at and using, and tools and frameworks. So it's been very powerful accelerator for adoption. Followed up by a steering committee. Now, I know one of the previous speakers felt that having an innovation team without all the red tape and bureaucracy is good, and I do agree with that. However, the steering committee allows us to actually get buy-in from the senior management across the organization. So when you're working in machine learning, you also need to dovetail with the big data teams, with the cloud adoption teams. So there's lots of other groups across the organization that may not be really focused on machine learning, but you need to partner with them. So the steering committee allows you to have that high-level engagement with the senior management. And this also helps us to focus on what the working group might focus on at a particular time as well. So that's number 4. Number 5, so the Center of Excellence. So this one is an interesting one, and actually for me, this is just the next step in the working group. So we've created a working group that goes across the firm. The next obvious step is to essentially fund that working group, and for a small part of that, create a centralized team. But a Center of Excellence for me, the only way this works is in a hybrid approach where you have a central team that helps with the standards and the tooling and the sort of vendor selection, things like that. But you need to empower the business verticals in a federated model to actually do the implementations. So the sort of Center of Excellence is supporting the business lines essentially to do the actual applications and deliver the solutions. Another key thing, and I think this has been really important for us as well, is to understand what are the problems we can solve with machine learning. And often we've seen that business will come to us and say, oh, we've got this problem, we want to use machine learning, but they don't don't understand why they machine learning is the right thing, and often it's not machine learning, it's just some simple automation or it's something else. So what we try and do is actually take a step back and understand what the actual problem they're trying to solve is, rather than saying, we've got this data, we want to put machine learning on top of it, and then hopefully it will solve a problem. So we've tried to sort of look at problems that we believe machine learning is really good at solving. So things that are very high volume, very manual, there's sort of quality concerns or issues with the sort of manual approach. And those tend to be good target areas to do proof of concepts in. The other thing that we've realized is for the majority of these things, it's almost less about a technology project and more about a business transformation project. Because whenever you, whether you're just building a machine learning application that's sort of producing a recommendation to your user, it's changing their business process essentially, and that takes time for them to get used to. The other thing to say with this is there's a skill in terms of understanding the complexity of the problem and trying to match that to the complexity of the solution, which I'll talk a little bit about in a second as well. So continuing from sort of understanding the problem, what we've tried to do is look at all the different pilots that were happening and POCs, and actually try and distill them down into generic use cases. And this is an example of where we've broken that down. And we do this for a number of reasons, but one of them is it allows us to see if a business unit over here has already done a project that is event prediction project of some sort of data set, the chances are the same algorithms, the same techniques could be applied to another business user. So there's lots of reuse potential with these things, but in order to leverage that, you need to identify where there's common types of problems being tackled across the firm. So this was a way to try and group the different proof of concepts together somehow. And these use cases are very much focused on the type of machine learning capability rather than the specific around the use case itself. And then taking that one step forward is you can then map those generic use cases across mapping it to the complexity of the problem versus the complexity of the solution. So what I'm trying to show here is the ones in the red zone are the ones that will use the sort of deep learning neural networks, the really advanced machine learning techniques, where the ones in the sort of green part of the square are sort of the simpler algorithms, so decision trees, clustering, that kind of thing. So you can use this to then guide your sort of your priorities in which applications and which proof of concepts you want to work on first, because over time your maturity and your ability to use the more complicated algorithms will grow over time. So it's probably better to tackle some of the ones in the lower part of this and then gradually sort of move across. It depends on your organization and how many sort of SMEs you've got internally and which vendors you're working with, but that was an approach that we wanted to sort of to leverage to help us understand our use cases and how we may tackle them and leverage reuse across the firm and the organization. The other thing we did was create a questionnaire, and this was really powerful as well. So when the business came to us and said, we've got this wonderful idea or problem we want to solve, we want to use machine learning. We actually sat down with them and went through a questionnaire which did a couple of things. The first thing it did is sort of get them to tell us about their data and to tease out whether they thought they got the right data in order to solve the problem, and often they didn't, and so it was then a conversation saying, well, you need to go away and sort of capture that information before we can actually do anything interesting with it, as an example. It also maybe highlights sort of data quality issues, which again sort of has been mentioned before. But the other part of the questionnaire also helps us to understand, what is the question they want answered, and is that a clustering, is that a classification, and really try and sort of help us position the problem and understand where that sits essentially. So that's been useful to just sit with the business and actually go through the process. The other thing we've done is use a version of the sort of technology radar, which allows us to map the different techniques and tools and vendor tools and platforms and the languages and frameworks, and allows us to, across the organization with all the different POCs running, to understand which things are being used, which aren't being used, and why. And so we use this to kind of help us document that, because with a large company, the Credit Suisse, the only standard is there is no standard. So what we're trying to do is at least try and slim that down a little bit and say, okay, well, everyone seems to be using this tool. Maybe that's the right tool for you to use as well. So we're using this as a way to inform the community through the working group to say, these are the tools other groups are using. Those are probably a good starting point for you to use as well. And this has been quite useful, something that we sort of use. And, as part of the proof of concepts and through the working group, we document which vendors and which tools are being used. And then that, again, is just all shared through the various sort of social platforms that we have. The last one is trying to measure your progress with this as well. So this is something I devised, which is the 4A's pyramid framework. And the idea with this is the pyramid tries to highlight the types of applications of machine learning in terms of their complexity. So often within the firm, the first thing you use machine learning techniques for is analytics. So you're looking at your data, you're analyzing the data, and you're coming up with various insight into that data through analytics. Augmentation is then where you're using machine learning to aid your business users in some way or form. So that may be through prediction or recommendation systems, things like that. So it's making them more efficient, but it's not fully automating their process necessarily. Automation's the sort of next level where you fully automate a process. And then adaptation is where you get into the real sort of science fiction side of things, where the processes can adapt to new situations and can learn across the organization. So that's really sort of cutting edge stuff. But you can use this approach and this framework to give you a sort of a capability, complexity, maturity map. So as you start to go live with different applications, you can sort of map them onto this and say, we've got 20 analytics applications and they're using decision trees or neural networks. So it shows your maturity in terms of the techniques you're using with machine learning across the different depths of complexity of application, if you like. So this is just a way for you to measure your adoption over time of machine learning across the board. So there are challenges, and there's as I mentioned at the start, there's a huge diversity of techniques and algorithms, and not just that, but the different tools and frameworks available. So it actually makes it very complicated to understand what the right technique to use for a given problem. The other challenge is it really does highlight data quality issues, data governance issues. So, you can't get a very accurate machine learning model if the data that's sort of that you're using to train it is not of a sufficient quality. So that becomes a major issue. The more human side of things as well that I've seen across the organization is everyone's trying to build and have ownership of machine learning. So one of the challenges I've found is everyone thinks they own machine learning in the firm, and actually the working group has really helped break down those boundaries, because the working group isn't trying to own anything, but it's just trying to share across the organization. So that's been something that people have accepted, and is broken down those sort of siloed barriers where normally people are just trying to do their own thing and just build their own little machine learning sort of groups and empires. And I think breaking down those barriers actually really helps the organization overall, and that's very positive. So my 9 recommendations for increasing adoption. So leverage the hidden talent in your organization. And I think depending on the size of the company you work in, there will be people there that either have some SME knowledge and they're just hidden and not really using it at the moment, or there's people that just really want the opportunity to start playing with the technology and start learning more. So I think that's very important. Run proof of concepts, but don't be afraid to fail fast. Now, having said that, if you're able to pick the right proof of concepts and the right application areas, you shouldn't need to fail too often. So, and in fairness, haven't had that many failures in proof of concept terms, but what we've been able to do is allow us to focus on the ones that are showing good progress, essentially. Set up the working group. So for me, that's really one of the key things. So use your network, find people across the organization that are interested in this area, and use them to sort of build momentum and get the firm excited about the use of machine learning. The steering committee is really useful as well, just to get the senior management buy-in and to get that visibility in other parts of the firm that you can partner with as well. Center of Excellence is good because the key to that is to stop duplication. So if you can have a Center of Excellence where you're building out the core frameworks that you can then share across the organization, that's really key, and that will help with the standardization across the firm. Define the problems and use the generic use cases. Again, this helps with reuse, and it helps just to link different people across the organization that have got very similar problems that they're trying to solve, and they can collaborate together. Use the questionnaire to sort of work with the business as well and help them to actually understand what their problem is and whether it actually is a machine learning solution or not that's applicable. Document your tools and vendor selections, again, so you can try and minimize the spread of different tools and frameworks that are adopted across the firm. And then find a way to measure progress as well. So 3 key takeaways: embrace innovation, fail fast, and use that to find your hidden talent. Use the early proof of values and proof of concepts to help you define your strategy over time. And then understand the problems using the generic use cases. And really to help you maximize reuse across the organization. So that's me. Thank you.
Fantastic. A very, very useful approach used at Credit Suisse. Any questions? Come on, there has to be questions. We've got one of them. Yeah, there we go, up the back there.
I'm just wondering if you've ever come across the challenge where you use machine learning to develop an outcome, and then you have to try and justify that outcome to someone who doesn't understand machine learning, and you can't really just go to the computer type.
We've had situations where we've built a machine learning application, and that's been in, we had to run that in production parallel for 6 months to actually help the users get confidence that this black box was actually doing the right thing. And we got to the point where we could actually show that it was better than some of their junior staff, and it was better than their junior staff. And when we got to that point, they then started to accept it, to the point where we're now looking to use that system to train the junior staff as well. So and as I say, it is a business transformation project, these things, as much as they are a technology project, because I think it does take the business a while to accept this black box as they perceive it, and to gain the confidence that it's doing the right thing time and time again. So we had to run that for a good number of months in order to get them to trust it and understand it. So that's the closest example.
Other questions? I'm kind of interested in that it seems like the company's really embraced artificial intelligence. Is that just the perception I'm getting at looking at it, or is that really driven across the entire organisation?
It's the last couple of years of it's been a pretty fast adoption, and it's kind of like once you've got the first thing live, the floodgates kind of opened, and then they realise that this thing actually does work. It's not all hype. And I think getting that first one into production was the key for us, because then that just showed, and it's the same for RPA as well. So once you get the first few of those things live and show that it actually works, it just goes crazy. So last year was great because we showed the first few sort of production systems. This year has just gone crazy because we've got so many sort of proof of concepts in different areas that we're all sort of racing to the finishing line.
And to get that first lot up, was that someone like you pushing for that, or was that people going, we need to get into this area?
It came from there's been a big focus on innovation in general. So we had a number of iterations of doing different kind of innovation projects, if you like, and out of one of those was the first sort of machine learning application. And I think to some degree we got lucky, because I think maybe more luck than judgment. We picked a business area that had a very manual process, huge volumes, needed to be very accurate, and I think it was the perfect sweet spot of all of that just made it the perfect first application. So whether we chose that through good thinking or whether it was just a luck, I'm not too sure, but I think getting that through, and it did take a long time to get that through the testing phase, but once we got that, it made it very accepted.
Yeah, fantastic. Let's go up the front here.
Is there a plan that you have around how you ensure that the staff who were doing those tasks are still able to complete those tasks as a redundancy? So I guess where I'm coming from is within banking in New Zealand, we have legislative requirements that
So at the moment, we're very much at the augmentation stage. So we're not fully replacing someone's job. We're just making their job easier by providing additional tools that allows them to. So for me, it's the 80-20 rule. So if we can semi-automate the simple stuff, the 80%, it allows them to focus more on the more difficult parts of their job, and hopefully the more interesting parts of their job. But we're not at the point where we've completely removed a team of people because it's fully automated. So we're not at that stage at the moment. Yeah.
Very good. All right. Can you, everybody, please thank Dr. Andy Pardoe.
Thank you.